There we go. And Ashleigh has joined us. There she is.
Hi, hello.
Hello.
Ashleigh, hi.
Hi, Margaret.
I've already done the recording and the Facebook Live. I've already started that up and I continue to let people in. So I'm going to give everybody just a minute here to get signed in. If everyone could mute your microphone except Ashleigh and Margaret and Jack, because sometimes we get feedback and then no one can hear anything. Wow, people are just coming into the waiting room.
Shavaun, I can take care of that if you want to go ahead and get started.
I think we're all here. I want to welcome everyone today. I'm Shavaun Kidd, and our special guest today is Jak Wonderly. And
Hey, Jack.
Thanks for having me.
Photographer and our one of the contributors and the co-author to the book, Searching for the Snow Leopard, Bjorn Pearson. He corrected me one day. He said, "Don't just say I'm a wildlife photographer because I take pictures of many different things." And Jak also takes photographs of landscapes and horses and wildlife. So I have to always be careful to make sure that they're photographers, not just of wildlife, even though that's our thing. But let's see here. There we go. We have with us today the Vice President of the Snow Leopard Conservancy, Ashleigh Lutz-Nelson. There she is. And we have our wonderful Margaret G from Australia. We got her out of bed.
Yes.
She's with us today.
I'm awake now. I've had coffee.
The brainchild of the book. And I see a lot of people that join us for our cat chats. It's great to see you back. I see some new faces. I know we have Suraj with us today, but I don't see his face. I see his name there. He doesn't have his camera on. I'm not sure if someone had asked if Rodney and Darla will be joining us today. Do you know, Ashleigh?
I'm not sure. I think they hope to if they can, but
sometimes
yeah, it's so nice to have everyone here. Hi, Linda.
All righty. Well, Jak, we're going to start off with getting to know you. So Jak lives in Sebastopol, California. If you're not familiar with California, that's north of San Francisco. It's near Santa Rosa. And Jak, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, how you came to be a photographer and what you thought you would be when you would grow up. And if you could just tell us how you got into this, because this is kind of, everybody thinks of it as a glamorous occupation, but we're going to find out today the real nitty gritty about photography and in the field and what it's really like. So take it away, Jak.
I think you have to be kind of a glutton for punishment to be a working photographer. I'll put it that way. I grew up wanting to be an engineer, and then I kind of switched to wanting to be more of a designer, an industrial design, somewhere in that balance between art and science, which in the long run played out well, because I think photography is a lot of that kind of balance between the art of the image and then the technology part that goes into making it. But anyway, I had a career in graphic design and computer graphics and advertising, and I took some photography classes in college, and I liked it, but I didn't fall crazy in love with it. But then when I was, this would have been about 2008, 2007, somewhere in there, I started taking, well, maybe a little bit before that, but I started taking pictures as a hobby. I got a really good camera, and really my output for it was the local zoo. I lived in San Francisco at the time on the west side. I was a mile from the zoo. And I would just take my camera. I kind of telecommuted. I had clients in San Francisco, but most of my coworkers were in Detroit on Eastern time. So at 2 or 3 o'clock, I was done, and the zoo was open for another couple hours. So I'd be at the zoo staring at the snow leopard or the tigers or the lions or, whatever was out that day. And Ashleigh worked there. So she spent more hours there than I did, but probably not too much because I was there a lot.
Now, Jack, when you started off, this was with a film camera, wasn't it? Didn't this precede digital?
This would have been early digital. Yeah. So, and then not long after that, I kind of also started shooting film, and I still shoot both today. So, and I'll come back to that in a bit. But as soon as I felt like I had some good photos, I mean, it basically, so the photography and the animal thing it was hand in hand to me. They were almost inseparable, and most of my early work was all animals. And snow leopards were definitely a big part of that. I broadened my zoo visits to pretty much all the zoos on the West Coast. There's snow leopards up in Seattle and Sacramento, and I went down to San Diego and photographed big cats all over the place. When my corporate job took a left turn and they wanted me to move to Los Angeles, I didn't feel like that was the right fit for me anymore. And I just said, I'm just going to be an animal photographer. I'll do something along those lines. And having no idea what I was getting myself into. I declined to relocate for my job and said, I'm going to hang out my shingle and be a photographer. Which in the long run has been great. In the short term, at that point, that was a difficult move. But I immediately got in touch with Rodney and Darla because they were local. And I started making prints of snow leopards and giving them to them for their fundraisers and stuff. And at the time it was probably just $30 here and there, but I was trying to make those connections and help however I could because I really was passionate about the cats. And then it's just been, more than a decade of trudging through navigating this crazy career. So it's gone well in some ways. I mean, I got published in National Geographic just like a couple of years after I really started doing it a lot. And I worked for them as an animal photographer, mostly for their kids' books. But that was a great gig because they basically just handed me a list of every book they had in their pipeline for the next couple of years. And if you pay attention to Nat Geo Kids, they publish a lot of books. And they were like, what do you want to work on? So I could just pick anything that I could get access to: horses, farm animals, iguanas. I did photo shoots of snakes all day. I got snapped at by a couple snakes, and then there were some little assignments. I photographed the ecosystem at Mono Lake and some wildlife rescue stuff, things like that. And then, as things progressed, I started traveling more and indulging my wildlife passion by going to international locations and doing the old school wildlife thing. Sometimes I was working, sometimes it was more I was working as a photographer, helping other photographers. It's a great way to get a week in Africa is if you have some credentials and skills and you're a good teacher, you can help amateurs go and get better photos and get paid to do so. So I've done that quite a bit too.
Yeah, Bjorn does that. He will take classes to Africa and treks and with amateurs and give them instruction on how to take photographs.
Yeah.
Now, I'm sure others are interested. How did you approach National Geographic, or did they see your work somewhere? I mean, that's a big name, and I imagine they get approached by everybody. How did you come to work for them?
That's a good question. I always say I'm bad at marketing, but in the case of National Geographic, I was very diligent about it. Most of my clients that I have now, they find me rather than the other way around. I'm fortunate having worked long enough in an area and having some expertise that people just call me. And when I reach out to them, stuff doesn't often happen. So, but in the early days when I was starting to take pictures and starting to gain some confidence, I was sending them something once a month. Like, it was on my calendar. And I didn't really have the names of the photo editors. I didn't know how to network in that arena. So I would just literally submit to anything they did. If they had a contest, I submitted a few things to Your Shot, which they still do. Anywhere I could get it in front of them. And sooner or later, I started noticing, like, oh, they reposted that on their website, or they shared that one, or they, they did something with it. It was never for money at that point. It was just, one thing at a time. But I got to a point where they were using my images more often than not when I sent it to them. And so I felt like, oh, well, I'm getting somewhere. And then I went to the Cal Academy of Sciences on one of my many photography afternoons on my free time. And I was obsessed with Claude, the albino alligator. If anybody's been to San Francisco and been to the Cal Academy, I'm sure you know about the very large, very white alligator that they have. And they have an underwater enclosure for him. Obviously he's amphibious. And when I was there, he was underwater, and just his nostrils were sticking out of the top. And there was this really interesting reflection. And I was in the lower section. It says no photography down there. So I didn't want to take a picture, but I talked to the docent, and I was like, so how come we can't take pictures? She says, well, the flash disturbs him. He's an albino, he's got sensitive eyes, and it's just not. I'm like, okay. And then I showed her, like, my camera literally doesn't have a flash. There's no flash unit on it. And she's like, no, that's fine. And there was hardly anybody there. So I had their permission, and I took some photos, and it came out as a very interesting sort of reflection. So the alligator's underwater, and then he's mirrored above, and the water lines in between.
Cool.
And it looked strange, sort of intriguingly strange. It was a weird sight. And at that point, I'd done enough photos in zoos to know how to, like, avoid reflections in the glass. And I wore black so I wouldn't cast any reflections of my own in the glass. And, just some of those tricks to be able to shoot through enclosures. Anyway, that was one of the many photos that I submitted to them. And, along the way, you get on all their mailing lists, right? Now I'm getting like 2 emails a day from National Geographic, just, advertising, or here's our latest article on this or whatever. So, and all that was in my Hotmail account. And one day I got an email in my Google account from National Geographic saying, we've been trying to reach you. We want to publish your photo. And I was like, really? You've been trying to reach me? And I went back through my Hotmail, and they had sent me emails to Hotmail because that's the email that they had for me. And I didn't open them because I wasn't expecting them to reach out. I was just looking at it like, oh, it's another newsletter. I just skipped right over it.
Oh, no.
But, yeah, fortunately, they were persistent. And so the difference this time was they wanted to print it in the magazine, and they printed it 2 pages. So it's when you open the magazine, it was the first major thing, and it was 2 full pages, and I had my name on it. And, when they run something 2 pages, they pay well. So I was really like, oh, I've hit the big time. I mean, it was just one photo, right? But I was excited. And then everybody starts calling you a National Geographic photographer, which I've never taken that title because I just felt like, I don't really work as an assignment photographer that often. So I didn't want to muddy the waters. But anyway, so that happened. And then I applied to their stock agency, which is a whole nother saga, and eventually was accepted there. And then I got the job with National Geographic Kids. But basically it was just dogged persistence and a lot of practice.
We just got a message that says, thank you for the meeting, Jack. Would you come to the Oregon Zoo and photograph the elephants?
I would love to. I love elephants too. They're great.
Yeah.
So now you had said that you had photographed all the big cats except the snow leopard.
Mm-hmm.
So before we get to the snow leopard, what was that like to do jaguars and tigers and lions and forest leopards?
Yeah, it's good because it's interesting that, sort of the contrast, because they're all really different. And I was just fortunate that I was able to work on assignments or photo tours, mostly photo tours in that case of the cats, where, we went to Africa. And so like lions, for example, are very easy to photograph. Most of the lions that are in either like national parks or private game reserves have seen Land Rovers and Jeeps driving around every day for years, generations back. So they're highly habituated to seeing people in Jeeps. Now, just don't get out of the Jeep because that throws them for a loop. But if you stay in your seat, they don't even look at you. And it's a little almost strange because this massive cat, like 400 pounds, walks right by your car, 6 feet away, and there's nothing between you and him. I mean, he could easily just jump in the car and have you for a snack. But they don't do that, and they don't even look at you. They just walk right past like you're not even there. And so in terms of, anyway, they're a very easy one, and they have their own sort of unique, in that sense. I didn't feel like the other cats did that so much, but lions in particular, they're pride
What
animals.
about the cheetah and the leopard that in Africa? What were they more elusive or?
A little bit more elusive, I think, partially just at least the places that I was, and most of this was in South Africa. I think the numbers are lower where I was. So, it took, the lions, you're there an hour and you see a lion on safari, but the cheetah took 10 days before we saw a cheetah. And I had one day where we had 2 or 3 hours of a cheetah sighting with a couple cats, and that's it. Leopards are a little more elusive, but I've photographed a fair amount of leopards, partially because in Sabi Sands and Londolozi down there, they have good leopard numbers, and they're somewhat habituated, so they don't run away from you. So it's very, if you go to Africa and you have some time, you can get cheetah, leopard, and lion. That's 3. Jaguar in the Pantanal down in South America.
They're a little bit more difficult.
They're more difficult. So that one is pretty much, you're just dedicated the whole week or however long you're there to the jaguar experience. They do tend to come down to the river and sit on the riverbank to cool off. And they also hunt, jaguars love water. So it just happened that over many years, people have they discovered that these cats would come down to the water. It's a popular fishing spot. So the fishermen are out there and they'd see the cats, and then word gets out and photographers start to come down and cruise the rivers and look for cats. And it just sort of built. And to now there's a pretty robust infrastructure of ecotourism to see the jaguars. And it's harder for sure. You might spend, the whole day and not see a jaguar. But it's still very doable. At least when I was there, we probably had, I don't know, 1 good sighting a day on average.
Wow, that's great.
It was, yeah. And, there's some challenges there. You're working out of a boat. There's no shade. It's extraordinarily hot and humid. And we have little black and white, black plastic walkie-talkies to talk between the boats. And we had them sitting out, and one person noticed on a particularly hot day, like it was literally melting, like the plastic was starting to liquefy from the heat. And the main challenge was just keeping everybody hydrated. When the boat's moving, it was fine. But if you had a cat sleeping under a tree and you wanted to wake up and walk down the beach so you can get some photos, you just sit there in the sun. And I don't know what the temperature was. It felt like 115. It was brutal. Anyways, but and the jaguars are very, they're very macho, I guess is maybe the way to put it. They have that weight to them. They're very big cats, very muscular, very stocky. They strut, they stalk. They're fascinating to watch. And then let's see, what am I missing? Tigers. That's another one of my favorites. Yeah. So tigers is its own experience because, like the snow leopard, they're amazing at camouflage, but in a different way. I mean, the snow leopard really just has to stop moving. It just stops moving and it's gone. Their camouflage is so exact to the landscape that blue sheep all the time will just walk right past one and not see it. And so, but the tiger kind of disappears purposefully. If it doesn't want to be seen, it won't be seen. There were a number of times where we're sitting in the Jeep in the forest on the trail and the monkeys are going crazy. So the animal's alarm call when there's a predator. So the monkeys start screaming and that there's a tiger there, and you're sitting in the open Jeep and you can't see it. And I mean, it's gotta be, the monkeys are right above you so they can see it. So the tiger's 30 feet away, might be 6 feet away. We don't know. And they have this, presence to them that is so intense, and they're so massive. I mean, they're the biggest cat and so dangerous. So that one makes the hair on your neck stand up, to see those guys. And that's, at the same time, you know, the infrastructure at those national parks is really developed, and they, you know, they have a system that they keep tweaking, but you'll have cars racing all over the place to find the tigers. And when they do get a sighting, it's sort of regulated, but you can have a group of cars come together. So you can have 40 people, you know, in 6 different Jeeps or something, all piled together watching this cat. And culturally, you know, the Indian people, at least in my experience at those places, you know, they're more boisterous and excited. And so it's not a, when I've been to Africa, we just sit with lions in silence for hours, you know, and just watch them nap and watch them bathe and stuff. But the tiger one, it's more like, oh, it's a little bit more Disneyland. There's a lot of people sometimes at those sightings. But they're difficult. I mean, I spent more than a week, and, you know, sometimes days would go by without a sighting. It just depends on where they are in the park and where your Jeep is. And if they want to be seen, they're seen. If they don't, they just disappear.
So in Africa, you're in a Jeep, and in the Pantanal, you're in a boat.
Mm-hmm.
And then with the tigers, you're in a Jeep. So you're confined. But now we come to the snow leopard. That's a whole different ballgame.
It is. I'm going to mention the mountain lions, because I skipped that one, and
Yes.
It relates a little bit to the snow leopard. So the mountain lions, I mean, I live in mountain lion habitat. I mean, in Northern California and Sonoma County, there's lions plenty. But I've never seen one in California. I have tracks. I volunteer at Wildlife Rescue. We have mountain lions there. So I know they're all around me, but I've never seen them.
Did you see any in South America when you were there?
Yeah, so we went to, I went with a group of photographers to South America, and we went looking for mountain lions. And the landscape there is really wide open, and there's kind of scrub brush and gravel, you know, mountains. So you have better visibility, whereas in Northern California, there's just trees and stuff breaking up the landscape everywhere. So it's very easy for the cat to disappear. But in Patagonia, they're a little more visible. And so you might see one, but it could be a mile away, like literally very far away. And you can barely make it out in the landscape with a long lens or a scope. And I would say we saw on average one a day, but some days we saw nothing. Some days we saw 2 or 3 together. Some days we would hike up some massive hill for an hour and a half in high winds with heavy packs, because we know there's a cat up there. And then we sit there for hours and hours and hours, and it never wakes up, and it gets dark and I can't even see it. And then we hike back down again. So it can test your patience for sure. So I always thought the mountain lion was the hardest of the cats that I did, until I did the snow leopard. And I knew snow leopard would be hard, but it's 5 times harder than mountain lions or something. I mean, it's extraordinarily difficult to photograph them. It's a little better to see one. If you go as a tourist and you want to see one, the odds are, if you spend the time, if you've got 10 days or 14 days, the odds are quite good now that you can see one. To be able to photograph one requires you to be closer. And so it's a different endeavor. And I want to be careful before we get into any details about my trip that I mention that the way that I did the trip was specifically to get photographs versus going as a tourist to see one like through a spotting scope. Because if you go and you want to take a peek at one, you can go to like Rumbach. Is it Rumbach? I think. There are places where the sightings are quite, I don't want to say frequent. They're more frequent, but there's also more people there, which means the cats keep their distance. And also those opportunities allow you to like stay in a reasonably comfortable, you know, homestay, whereas I was camping, and that's a whole nother level. So if I start moaning about how cold it was and sleeping in a tent, I want to make sure that people know that if they want to go see a snow leopard, they don't necessarily have to do what we did.
Well, Margaret, I don't see her there in the camera, but I know her experience was not in a tent. You know, she was staying in homestays,
Mhm.
but she remarked how very cold it was and standing around looking for them. You know, it was very, very cold. There is Margaret.
I just had to let my cat out actually into the garden. Speaking of cats, so cat duty.
You stayed in homes. You didn't stay in a tent, but you still, and you went in the wintertime, didn't you? Weren't you there in January? So it was still pretty cold when you, Margaret, when you went.
Oh yes, yes. Sorry, I thought you were talking to Jack.
Oh, no.
Absolutely. When we arrived in Leh, they said it was -19, and then we're in Leh. And then we went up to Rumbak, it was -20, then it got to -25. Overnight, it was -30. So, you know, it's pretty bracing. I don't know. I was actually terrified of the cold, to the point I almost bailed from the trip. And
Oh,
I know it's a terrible thing to admit to, being such a weakling. But I was in Bhutan because my husband's a volunteer doctor there, and about 3 weeks before the trip, and it was pretty cold in Bhutan. I said, you know, I don't think I can do this. And he said, what? And I said, it's going to be -20, 25. I'd actually seen some film that Oriel alumni had taken, the video footage, and it looked terrifying. And I'd been to the Himalayas, to Nepal.
I know the video you're talking about.
Yeah,
One of our
and
other
I thought, oh my God,
contributors
what have I got myself into?
posted a video on Facebook of his
Yeah.
on a road, and it scared me to death.
And then I was worried about the altitude, even though I knew I'd be chock full of this Diamox stuff, which helps stop cerebral edema. And I said, my husband, look, because I was going with another Australian friend, a Bhutanese friend, fabulous people in Ladakh, of course. And I said, I just don't think I can do this. I want to bail. And my husband's very practical. You know, I'm the mad, emotional, romantic one. And he said, you've paid, you're going. And that was it. Thank God he said that.
Jack,
Did
you ever like hesitate as you were making the plans to go and think, I can't do this, I'm not going to do this?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it kind of snuck up on me that I'd photographed all the cats except the snow leopard. And then I realized that, I mean, one, I wanted to do it. And two, I mean, the snow leopard is just this mythical animal to me. And I've read the books on it, and it just is haunting to me, that cat, and that it's out there in this crazy landscape. And so the idea of seeing one to me just seemed like kind of, I don't say an impossible dream, but I didn't think it was going to happen. But, you know, I'd see Rodney and Darla at events, and I'd ask them about, you know, how can you see a snow leopard? Is that reasonable to expect at this point? And I talked to people who run treks and started to get information. And then, you know, it just like literally I got a text one day saying, you know, do you want to go? And I was like, yes, I want to go. So I just like jumped at the chance before I realized what I'd signed up for, in terms of the conditions. The Snow Leopard Conservancy worked with me. We had a plan. We knew what we wanted to get. There were photos that we could use. We had, you know, donors who were helping. And so I started planning, and I realized that, you know, the way that it was suggested to me to do this was, if you want to photograph them, you need to be closer, right? You can't do it from half a mile away. You need to be 100 yards, 200 yards away to get good photographs. And I've done enough wildlife photography to go, okay, yeah, that sounds right. So that means you need to be away from the crowds. So we go to a different part of Hemis National Park, and it involves camping. And I've camped at maybe 20, 30 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's it. And I've never been above maybe 11,000 feet. And this was going to be, you know, 14,000 feet up to 14,000 or a little over. And the temperature was projected to be -20 Fahrenheit at night. And I was like, is that safe? Like, do you freeze to death? At what point do you just freeze to death in your tent? Like, I really didn't know the answer. So I'm
I
reading
know
all,
what that's like. A couple years ago when we experienced here in the Midwest that polar vortex, my horse decided to become up lame at 9 o'clock at night. I had the vet out here and it was 22 below in my barn. And I was out there for an hour, just an hour, with the veterinarian in my barn at 22 below. And I couldn't do it. I had to excuse myself and run into the bathroom and go sit in the shower. I couldn't feel my hands. I couldn't feel my feet. It was like, I don't, of course, she was dressed way better than I was, but with a lot more layers and a lot more heavy boots and socks. But yeah, that would scare me too, Margaret. I'm not surprised you wanted to bail, and Jack, you too.
Now I want to go back because it was so fabulous.
Yeah, not.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm blooded now. I think the expression is blooded.
Jack, what's it like to travel to all these countries? You have to get vaccinations and permits and visas, and then there's the matter of getting all your equipment there and the airlines. And what's that like? Isn't it challenging?
Yeah, the gear alone is a major endeavor. Part of the, half the planning is just the logistics with how do we find a snow leopard and what is that experience going to be like, and how am I going to, what expectations, like there's a lot of studying snow leopard behavior. How close do they want to be to you? They feel more comfortable with a natural barrier in between. If they're going to escape, they're going to go up. You like just understanding how that animal's going to behave was part of the research. And then the other part of the research was, how do I not die in the cold and deal with all this equipment? So, Rodney and Darla helped me, and they connected me with Jigmet Dadul, who works in India with the Snow Leopard Conservancy. I think it's the Snow Leopard India Trust, if that's correct.
That's
Okay.
correct.
And, and he's connected over there, and he knows all the snow leopard activity, and his family and stuff can help with the trek. So we planned this thing out, and I just had to basically trust them that this was going to be okay. So I let them take care of things like tents and food, and they provided some layers for me because there's only so much I can carry, right? I can only get so much gear through the airports. But yeah, I had to basically I had two backpacks full of photo gear. I mean, the 800 millimeter lens, which is, it's massive, especially when you put the hood on it and you put it on a tripod. You can't even see my arms, it's this big. The 800 millimeter lens and teleconverters and brackets and everything that goes with that. And then I also, what if we get closer? I have shorter lenses. I want to photograph things like the people, the other animals that are in the area. I want to photograph the livestock enclosure. So I had to bring like a full range of gear, plus all my winter clothes, plus like backups. Like I brought a bivy sack because I thought if I got cold, I could put one more layer, on, and just like insurance, because I didn't know exactly what I was getting myself into. So I had a pretty massive pile of stuff. The visas aren't too bad. Obviously you need a visa for India, and Jigmet takes care of the stuff for the national park. I've always been kind of casual about the vaccines. I know it's like a big topic now, but when you travel a lot, you just look at what's needed or recommended, and you just go to the travel clinic, and I get 2 or 3 vaccines in a day and I don't even think about it. So I've had, tons of vaccines, and most of them I probably never needed, but they were recommended. So I just get plenty of that. And then, just even the altitude is its own problem. Margaret mentioned Diamox, which is something that mountain climbers use in extreme altitude. And that's recommended for this trip, partially because you go from Delhi in India, then you have to fly to the city of Leh in northern India, and you basically kind of cross into the Himalayas. So you go from about, I think it's 800 feet in Delhi, and Leh is 11,500.
Yeah.
And for your body to go from that altitude to the next altitude to go more than 10,000 feet in an hour and a half is really hard on your body. The oxygen level drops very noticeably. Our bodies are super sensitive to the amount of oxygen that we get. And if you drop that number 20 or 30%, you're going to get sick. It's just a fact. And they told me that the first day you're in Leh, you should just stay in your room, don't do anything, lay on the bed, maybe go downstairs and get a drink or something, but like, don't even leave the hotel.
Mm.
And I got to Leh and I was like, I'm in this amazing foreign city, this cultural attraction, and there's monasteries and markets and all this stuff that I'm just dying to photograph. Like, I can't stay in my room. But when I got there, I was just like, oh God, it was brutal.
So Jack, you didn't take the Diamox prophylactically. You didn't
No,
take it
I
in
did take
advance?
it.
Yeah, and you still
did
felt
take it.
sort of whacked.
You take it, I took it a few days, like the few days up to the moment that you land, and then a few days after, something like that.
Mm.
It's like 5 to 7 days of medication to ease the transition.
Mm.
Yeah. I mean, I went to my doctor. He just said, yeah, absolutely. At that altitude, it's recommended.
Yeah,
Well,
some
I know what
people-
you're talking
Yeah,
about
yeah.
because, well, you live at sea level, and here in the where I am on the Mississippi River, we're between 500 and 900 feet. But when I fly into Denver and I get off the airplane, I'm usually panting all the way up the jetway and into the airport, into the next gate. And by then I'm usually breathless because there you're at, you're a mile. And I've hiked from up to in Colorado, I've hiked up to about 11,000, 12,000. And it's really something. I remember my very first time, I just fell down on the trail. All my stuff went rolling down the hill, and it was a nice groomed trail with little rocks along the side, nice smooth groomed trail, and it wasn't very steep. And it was a beautiful day, and I'm walking along, and I was a college student, and I couldn't breathe. I just fell down on the ground. So I know what you're talking about, and you're in a rugged terrain and snow and ice and I can't imagine.
Yeah. So we had it takes about 36 hours to get there. You need another 36 hours to kind of literally just catch your breath. The first day you're kind of shot. The second day I could walk around town with a little light backpack on and just start working my lungs a little bit. And, every day it gets easier. So I think like the third day, we drive out of the city and you follow these old cobblestone roads to where just you get to the end of, civilization, so to speak. At that point, you're in a little village and you just get out of the car and there's this group of ponies waiting for you. And they strap all the gear, all the camping gear. There's a propane tank to cook from. There's, sleeping bags and tents and water, like everything you're ever going to need we didn't know how long we were going to be out there. We're guessing 10 days. And we've got 4 people, I think, working for me, which was shocking to me. Like I've never had help with anything. But these guys, this is what they do. And wages in that area are shockingly low. I mean, people live on very little money. So it's not cost prohibitive. I mean, the cost of the trip had very little to do with having help. Most of it was all the logistics, the airfare and other things. It wasn't really having a team. But you need help. To find a snow leopard is not something you're going to do on your own. I mean, it happens. And there's some people like Tashi and some of these people that are, partners with the Snow Leopard Conservancy that do it. But generally speaking, if you want to find a snow leopard, you need all the eyes you can get and all the help you can get. So,
but don't you think, Jack, sorry to interrupt, it's quite nice, and I felt the same even though I wasn't there taking photographs. I mean, I just with my iPhone, but you sort of, when you surrender to trust them, it's terrific. You just open your heart, that they're going to help you to the max. You're in their habitat, and Jigmet, he's like a snow leopard himself. You just give over, and then it's, I don't know, it really boosts your confidence. Instead of thinking, what about this, what about that? You just go with it. And hope you see that.
Tashi lives there, so I always think of him as a cat whisperer anyway. He gets so close to these animals, but he lives there. And that's the thing. He's always going. He just got back from another trek to go photograph, and I know as we've been seeing some of his new photographs, and they're just marvelous. And of course, once again, he's really, really close, but he's acclimatized. He doesn't have to worry about the altitude, and he can, because he lives there. But it's a big change for those of us who live at a couple hundred feet above sea level.
That's one thing. you know, one thing which, if you go again, Jack, and I'm sure you will when you can, I spent, I know it's easy to say, just go away for 2 months from family and everything, but I'd had 2 months in Bhutan at, 2,200 meters, which is when you arrive in Paro. So that 2 months at altitude, I'm sure made a massive difference to me doing pretty well in Ladakh. I had the Diamox, but I think that really cranked up my tolerance to the altitude, having that 8 weeks in Bhutan prior, rather than just going straight from Sydney sea level, Sydney, Delhi, Leh. But it's a long time to be away.
I love your story. I know it was awful, but I love your story about how everything in your tent was frozen, including your contact lens fluid. Everything was frozen in your tent that wasn't in the sleeping bag, you said.
Yeah, I kind of knew in my head, I knew what I was getting myself into, like I'd done my homework, but I hadn't done it before. So there were all these little practical things that I didn't calculate for. And so, we left Leh and we hiked, just walking on flat ground at that altitude, even after a few days, is still exhausting. But the ponies carry a lot of the weight, and we set up camp. And then I go into my little tent at night, and it's a pretty normal tent. I mean, it might have been a 4-season tent, but it's not, meaning it's, it's suitable for winter, but 20 below is a whole nother thing. And, we have really good sleeping bags. They put foam down to, buffer the ground thing and all this stuff. I was still worried, but I handle cold way better than heat. So if I go to like Central America and it's hot, the first day I'm there, I just literally almost fall over. I cannot tolerate the heat. The cold, I'm just better suited for. So I wasn't as freaked out maybe as if it was 130 Fahrenheit, I'd be really worried. But 20 below, I'm like, maybe I'll be okay. But they give
At
you a little
least you
hot water
weren't dealing with snakes and spiders and scorpions and things of that nature.
Right. Actually, and that's, when I was there, Hemis National Park is so quiet. I mean, it is pin drop quiet. There's very little wind. And then when there's nothing for it to blow against. It's just rock. And there's just enough vegetation for like the blue sheep and the prey animals to eat. But otherwise there's nothing there. And I know, there might be pikas and there's raptors and there are animals there, but I mean, there's way more wildlife in my backyard than there is in that park. So it just seems like you're just living in a rock landscape. You're on, a snow-covered moon or something. Anyway, I woke up in the middle of the night, and this is sort of a gritty detail, but it occurred to me when I was packing, I didn't want to have to go outside to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night when it's 20 below. So I'm at the camping store and I pick up this water bottle to urinate in. That they're specifically designed, these camping bottles, so you can get up and go to the bathroom and then pour it out in the morning. But it was like an accordion style one, so it would pack down for travel, and you'd expand it and relieve your bladder and then put it aside. And anyway, so I wake up the first night and it's 2 o'clock in the morning and I'm frozen, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to use my water bottle. And I started to expand it and it cracked. It just fractured. It was still cold that the plastic just crumbled. So then I had to go outside and use the bathroom the normal way. And, but the stars are incredible, and if I'd stayed in my tent where it was a little bit warmer, I would have missed that night sky in the Himalayas. So I was kind of glad. And yeah, if you don't put anything that can't freeze, has to be inside your bag against your body.
Yeah.
And so, and as the week went on, I realized that was a lot of my stuff. Like my camera batteries can't freeze. Anything like a sunscreen, because you're high altitude, you need sunscreen sometimes. My contact lens case, the first day I went to put my contact in and it's just an ice, like my contact's frozen in ice. There's no way to get that thing out. I woke up and like everything inside the tent is covered in frost. The cameras don't work, and I'm supposed to put this next layer. I pretty much sleep in multiple layers of clothes and then under 2 sleeping bags. And then I had the heaviest down pants and parka like on top of the sleeping bag to give me more insulation. And all that was not only frozen, but frozen stiff. So like you pick up the pants and it's like cardboard. you know, and I'm supposed to put these on now to stay warm. And so the first couple of days are just, it's pretty miserable. You know, I woke up and my nose was bleeding, like from the altitude and the dry air. I had blood all over my face and everything's frozen. And I'm just, what am I doing here? You know, and it's pre-dawn and these guys give you a little bit of tea and, you know, they're used to the altitude and they are super fit. And they're just like, okay, let's go. And they start hiking uphill. So I'm barely awake and I'm just completely frozen. And we start going uphill and going uphill with a pack on. We're starting at 12,500 feet and hiking up is just, that's a difficult way to wake up. But, you know, these guys take really good care of me. You know, they're constantly making sure I'm okay. They're feeding me. They're, you know, anything that you need is kind of, they've done this a lot. And so as a rookie, they made my life a lot easier.
Can you tell us about this photograph that I'm sharing right now of the sheep?
Yeah. Hold on, I'm just fussing with my cable so my computer doesn't. There we go. Yeah, so blue sheep is the most likely thing that I would see on a given day. They'd be wandering the hillsides looking for food. And this is a family, as best I can tell. I'm not a blue sheep expert, but that's a male, I guess it's a ram, and then a young one and the female in front. And so anytime you see blue sheep, you're like encouraged because that means a snow leopard might be hanging out watching. But the days are basically, you know, as long as we have sunlight, we're out and we're looking through scopes, or in my case, usually the lens. But we might have 5 people just scanning the hillside 12 hours a day, looking for any movement, trying to figure out if there's a cat. So yeah, there's, I don't know if that's Jigman or his son. I can't tell from the back, but
I think that's Jigman.
That's pretty close to where camp was. And you'll see like the left side of the valley is covered in snow and the right side is a little drier because the sun hits that side. And during the day, it'll kind of start to melt the snow a little bit when the sun's up. Yeah, and it's a patience and meditation game. You're just staring at rocks all day long. And the crew that I was with, only one person spoke much English. So they weren't really conversational with me other than they would make an attempt at dinner. And I don't speak Ladakhi, so I'm very grateful. I don't blame them for not speaking English. But what that meant, you know, it's quiet there. They don't speak English. I don't speak their language. And so basically it became a meditation. It was like a retreat. You're only doing one thing all day. You're silent. The landscape forces you to focus on your breathing, to watch where you're walking. I felt like I was doing walking and hiking meditation all the time. And then each day that goes by, it just gets a little easier. You know, your body continues to adapt to the altitude. These guys would push me a little harder. So we go from 12,000 to 13,000, then eventually we get to a little over 14,000 feet. And the idea is to just keep going higher because the view's better and you can see more terrain. So we go to certain vantage points. And if you look on that image where he's looking to in the back of the valley, not the highest peak in the very back, but the darker one that's right below it, that's, there's actually a little citadel there. There's the ruins of an old stone structure. And once I got acclimated enough that I could make it, we would climb up to that spot and use that as our lookout. There it is.
That's it.
And
right
I
there.
absolutely fell in love with this valley and that place in particular. I thought it was just, it's literally situated halfway between heaven and earth. It is an amazing landscape. And there's nobody out there. I mean, we saw probably a few other people, you know, in the 8 days we were in that valley. You know, somebody would pass through with their pony or something, but otherwise there's nobody there.
But then you saw her.
Yeah. So the transition was we spent a long time in that valley and we saw some tracks. And so we knew cats had been there. They'd been there fairly recently. But the cats move way faster than we do. and you can't necessarily track them in all the terrain, or you can lose their tracks in the rocks and stuff. And they move too fast. So a snow leopard can cross 25 miles while I'm asleep. So there's just, if it's nearby, you might see it. If it's not, there's no way to like follow it. So eventually we had to kind of give up on that valley, and we pulled down camp, and we were going to go to another place called, we were going to go visit a village. I wasn't sure which one yet. But as we hiked out of the valley, we got a cell phone signal, and Jigmet and his son connected, and Jigmet had heard, because he knows everybody in Ladakh, that a snow leopard had killed a yak at a village about 3 hours away by car. So we connected with a Jeep who loaded up the essential gear, and then the guys hiked out the rest of the stuff later, and we drove 3 hours on very treacherous, sketchy mountain roads to this village. And when we got there, we could see the yak, and the snow leopard was nowhere to be found. But I mean, my heart was racing. Just the idea that there was the possibility we were actually going to see one after 8 days of waiting. I was just giddy with excitement. I couldn't contain myself. And the guys are all pretty relaxed. They're like, oh, it'll be there. Don't worry. If it has a kill, it's not going. I'm like, let's go now. I don't want to stop for tea. I don't want to do anything. I want to get there. I'm not moving. All this stuff. So we just picked a spot on the ridge where we thought we were far enough away not to impact the snow leopard's decision to feed. We didn't want to keep it from eating, but close enough to kind of get reasonable photographs. It ended up being about 200 meters. We measured it out. One of the guys had like a scope they use for golf or something, and you could tell how far away it was. And it was literally just on the edge of my gear's ability to get photographs, and also just the practicality of you're shooting through atmosphere. Even at that altitude and clear air, 200 meters is enough to kind of make the photos fuzzy and warp. And sometimes you could actually see the snow leopard kind of bend, and it's just changes in the heat or whatever in the air between you and it. So it was pretty far. And at first it just appeared as I'll put it this way. So we knew the yak was in the valley. It was laying right there. And so we knew the snow leopard was there and probably watching. So we had my team, which I think was 5 people at that point, and then another group of people came with scopes. So there were about 10 people looking through scopes at this hillside behind it for probably an hour and a half, and nobody could find the cat. And then this little boy came out. He was maybe, 8, 9 years old. And he pointed to a ridge. He's like, over there. And he had seen the cat leave and then go up there and sit down. So he knew approximately where it was. And I don't know for him if we would have found the cat. I mean, it had laid down. And if you look even at this photo, like the color of the cat against, like the brush and stuff in the background, when it lays flat, it just looks like a bush. And you literally can't see it. And I saw it through their scope, and they're like, it's right in the middle scope. And I'm like, I can't see it. And we looked at it through my lens, and they're like, it's right in the middle. And I'm like, I don't see it until it moved. And it all of a sudden a head came up, and I was like, oh my God. Like the camouflage is just unbelievably good. And so we waited the afternoon. It not long after we first saw it, it just went over the backside of the hill. And I thought maybe that was the only time I was going to see this cat. But as nightfall came, it slowly made its way down. And that was the first time I got a good look at it. It walked probably a third of a mile down the hill in front of me, pretty far away, and it was very dim. So I actually shot more video than stills, because I can use a lower frame rate with the video. And it came down, and it just sat by the yak. And we went out the next morning before dawn. But at this point, we transitioned to sleeping into somebody's house. I mean, it's a primitive house by our standards, but quite lovely in its own way. They had like a propane heater kind of situation, and electricity a couple hours a day off a generator. They don't have running water. They have to bring their own water in and stuff like that. But lovely people, and they would make you tea and serve you little biscuits, and they were brewing beer in the back room. And like, it was a really cool cultural experience, and a bit of relief having been in the tent. So now at night I could like sleep in 2 layers instead of 4. And
Ah,
it was pleasant, considering. So we get up pre-dawn with headlamps, and we cross the village, and then we had to hike a way out into this valley, and we set up a blind. So if you're not familiar with a blind, it's basically a camping tent that's specifically for hunters or photographers to stay in and peek out of, and it just minimizes movement. There's no question in my mind that that cat knew I was in the blind at all times. It was always watching in our direction. It would always face us, even though it had a fox and some magpies and stuff that it would chase off from time to time. It was mostly looking at us. But the cool part for me was it meant I got to just basically, I'd look through my lens and it would be looking in our direction. And I felt like I was having a staring contest with a snow leopard for hours. It just went for hours and hours and hours. And after having basically spent, a ton of time and effort, months planning, and 8 days in the valley, sleeping in the cold, feeling like I probably wasn't going to see one, to all of a sudden have like endless hours with one, I was just over the moon. And it basically, this was a livestock animal. The snow leopards are often seen in that valley, and if they get a chance, they'll take a livestock animal. It's just easy prey. It was a pretty good sized yak, and the snow leopard was injured pretty bad. I'm certainly not a vet, but if that was my kid, I would have been terrified of permanent eye damage and stuff. The eye was swollen shut. There was blood all down this side of his face, or her face. We think it's a female. And I assume she got injured in the attack. And then, at some point midday, the light would just be too horrible. It was so bright. And, I would retreat back and we'd photograph other things. We interviewed the farmer who owned the yak. We went to see, where they live, and kind of got more of the backstory. And then as the sun got better in the afternoon, I'd go back. I probably had 12 or 13 hours, I think, total with the cat over 2.5 days, something like that. I never once saw it take a bite of that animal, of the yak, but it was guarding it the whole time. And as the days went on, the eye got better, and it started to, you could tell that the swelling went down. It could probably still see out of that eye. It looked like it was recovering. But it was an
how
interesting.
many people were around when you were photographing the snow leopard?
When we first got there, it was just me and my team. And in fact, at one point, we were concerned. We were like, we're very visible here, and we don't want to discourage the cat. We want to make sure that the cat came back so it could feed. So we left, meaning, well, we didn't literally leave the location, but we really went behind the ridge to hide, so that the cat could feel like it was not being watched and would come down to eat. And sure enough, it would do that. So, and then we'd kind of creep back over to our blind and take photos. So at first it was just 5 or 6 people, and then we thinned that down. So it was literally, at times it was just me and Jigmet, because we didn't want to have, again, we want to minimize any impact on the cat's behavior. But eventually word gets out, somebody in the village talks and other people show up, and everybody was really generally very respectful, and everybody stayed in the same arena. We agreed that, we were going to stay on this ridge and not approach the cat. Jigmet said if it was just he and I, and we were still in Rumbach, we probably could have gotten closer without, disturbing the cat. But being on the edge of the village, and as the number of people grew, it became important that we didn't change anything. We just literally stayed put. So the cat knew we were there, and it was over there, and it could let us know if we were encroaching on its behavior.
The photographs are often deceiving when we look at them in a book like Searching for the Snow Leopard. It looks like you're really, really close to the animal. And in reality, you're not, especially snow leopards. How far away were you again from her? This one?
About 200 yards.
Well,
And from what I've read and continued to follow snow leopard sightings since I've been there, for somebody to get within 100 yards is really rare. It does happen. Usually if someone's alone, or they happen to just come around a corner and they see a snow leopard, like they didn't realize each other's presence was that close. It's really rare to get closer than that. And as wildlife photography goes, 100 yards, 200 yards is pretty darn far away. That's not ideal at all. When I was in Patagonia, our best mountain lion sighting, it had killed a guanaco, which, if you're not familiar, is similar to a llama. And it was on the ground eating, and we were probably 30 yards away. And that's a great distance for photos. But the snow leopard, that's highly unlikely. But I think, part of the beauty of the cat is their elusiveness. And so all of the effort that it takes, if it was easy, they wouldn't have the allure that they do, right? So I felt like seeing one and having a chance to photograph it was, that was the best wildlife experience I've had. That's as exciting as it can get. But you have to go into it resigned to the fact that you may not get any photos. You could spend months planning and thousands of dollars and several weeks of your time and come home with nothing. But to me, just seeing the track in the snow was pretty magical in and of itself. To just know that cat and I are walking in the same place was very exciting. And
they're watching you, even if you can't see them. They're probably there watching you.
There were probably several snow leopards saw me, and I only saw one. And because it had a kill, we were very lucky that we had some time with it. A lot of sightings are fleeting. 30 seconds, the cat disappears over the hillside, and it's gone.
Did
you see any, when you were there, did you see any other groups of people, either amateurs or professionals, out trekking, looking for snow leopards?
There were two gentlemen from Europe that we camped near for part of our time in Rumbach. So I did see those two. And then, as I said, once we'd been a day or two with this cat, a couple photographers showed up, and I think they were local. They were Indian gentlemen with significant photo equipment as well. Yeah.
You had mentioned that when you went to see tigers, that it was more like a Disneyland experience, like Universal Studios, because there were so many people. Ecotourism has become an important economic thing for people who live where they only make $400 or $500 a year. It's been is that, do you see them being able to manage the ecotourism in places where there's like tons of people, and it could get like that, I know, in snow leopard areas?
I think, ecotourism is a good conservation ally when it's done well, right? So like, if you just look at Africa, and I'm not a conservation expert, but in my experiences traveling and witnessing how this works, people, when there's money to be made from the animals, is basically what it comes down to. And if there's money to be made and livelihood to be had, people have a vested interest in protecting those animals and the terrain that support the animals. So, there are large parts of Africa that are dedicated to animal safari. And as long as the tourists are there, it's very hard to poach those animals. And it's very hard, and then the eco lodges and the parks and stuff, they're highly motivated to protect the animals. And so if that means they have anti-poaching units, they use drones, there's just, the proper fencing, or, discouraging people from messing up the animal's existence. And, in India, they walk a very fine line between letting people see the tigers and then shutting it down. Like when I was there, one of the cats apparently had an injured paw. It was limping, and the game park warden, or whatever they call them there, saw that, and they just shut that whole zone of the park down, and they sent in a vet or somebody to kind of assess the status of the animal. Now, because they shut that part of the park down, and that was one of the best places to see tigers, our sightings went way down. But that's the necessary decision to protect the animal. And there are other places where I've seen, like orangutans in Borneo, they have guides and a system for letting people see the orangutans, and it supports the locals and it keeps the orangutans safe. but some of those guides are not well trained. They do not teach people, the tourists, how to respectfully be in the same space as these wild animals. So I've seen it done poorly. And it, you know, in the case of the snow leopard, there's a number of things that are happening to support snow leopard conservation indirectly through tourism. So, you know, when I went, obviously we paid to stay in that homestay when we were in that village, and that family, you know, they can improve their home, and they want to see snow leopards around their village, as opposed to in the past, if a snow leopard attacked a yak, the obvious response, however horrible it is for the rancher to kill the animal. The retribution killing, you know, they make so little money, and one animal is worth months of salary to them. So if you have a predator come in and kill your livestock, I mean, that's taking food away from your family. That's threatening your children's existence. That's like, it's such a horrible thing for them to lose livestock. But they're also, you know, they're grazing livestock in snow leopard habitat. Like, it's gonna happen. You're gonna have attacks. So you can have tourism so that they earn money other ways. You can have livestock insurance programs, which the Snow Leopard Conservancy has established. And it's very simple. So these people pay a small amount of money into a fund. And if they lose an animal to a snow leopard, they're reimbursed. So they don't have the motivation to kill a snow leopard. And the fascinating thing about snow leopards is that even though they're, you know, incredibly athletic and agile and fast and strong, they do not fight back when humans attack them.
Mhm.
They've never attacked a human that I know of. I've certainly not read about that. And I've read that there's never been a case of a snow leopard on record attacking a human. And if you throw stones at it or pull out a gun and fire, it does not leave. It will just sit and take it. So it was easy in some ways for them to take out a snow leopard. But if we can carefully manage how many people are there and not overrun the place, and maintain that balance where you have good guides telling people how to respectfully be in the same space as these wild animals and not impact their behavior, then it can really be a win-win. You know, the snow leopard is protected. People get to see the animal that they love so much. The landscape is somewhat preserved because there's motivation not to overgraze it, not to, you know, do things that are going to impact the success of that wild animal. Obviously, you know, it's a mixed bag. I mean, tourism, you know, there's a big carbon footprint when you travel, and things like that. But I definitely think on the whole, when it's done well, it's a great thing to go
We
and see these animals in the wild. It also I just find it changes your perspective on life as a person.
we chatted with Vikram Singh about a month and a half ago,
Yeah.
and he owns Wild World India travel company, and they go all over the world. But of course, he does snow leopards, and he told us that there have been times when he has had to ask other people to be quiet and be more respectful
Mhm.
in another group, like
Mhm.
nearby them. He said, we're being very quiet and not moving around a lot and not disturbing the animal. But then another group would come and they would be loud and talking and laughing. And he said, we would have to say something. And so, like you said, if it's done well, it's very powerful means of protecting the animal and bringing in another source of finance, of economics. But if it's not done well, it can be detrimental to the environment and to the animal. But it's an experience. Everyone who contributed to the book has had this experience, but me. But so I live vicariously through you. But it's amazing. On the back of Searching for the Snow Leopard, our editor wanted to use Jak's quote, for me, the snow leopard represents that precious part of us, mystical and often hidden from the world, that holds great power. Spending time in her world and finally seeing her was like a dream, one that continues to empower me. Very powerful words, Jak. really
Thank you. It was a
amazing.
powerful experience for me. Definitely a highlight. Um, I kind of, when we started talking about photography, it's a very difficult career, but for me personally, it's a fantastic lifestyle, and the things that I've gotten to do, basically from the excuse that I'm going to photograph it and maybe get paid for that, are remarkable. I mean, I have this long list of amazing experiences because of my camera. At least that's what drove me particularly to do it. But it's hard to imagine a more impactful wildlife experience for me personally than seeing a snow leopard in the wild and knowing they're out there. And even, as much as the altitude and the cold and everything is difficult. I mean, the reason we go in January is because the snow leopard comes down to our level a little bit in the winter, because they follow the snow line, drives the prey down. So they come down to 14,000 feet or something that a human can tolerate for some period of time. Other times of year, they're not in our habitat. They're at 19,000 feet, and we just don't do well up there. So to just have that moment where their almost supernatural world, in my opinion, seems to come down, and we kind of raise ourselves up and we can touch that for just even for 10 seconds is a remarkable thing.
Did you
I love-
feel
Go ahead.
like she was allowing you to photograph her? I mean, she seemed to be out in the open. You said she was not eating. She just sat there and knew you were there. Because I know Bjorn mentioned in his writings that he felt like it wasn't like I was searching for her. It was like she drew me to her or him. That, they were, that the cat arranged his meeting with it. Did you? That's how the feeling, that because he went in search of it, he just knew it was there, and he sat down and he waited. He said until it was almost dark, and my guide had left me, and he said I was so frozen I couldn't feel anything, and he said, and then all of a sudden here comes a whole herd of sheep running at him and a snow leopard chasing them from behind, and he said I had the feeling the hunt wasn't successful. But the cat walked up the ridge in front of him and sat down and just looked at him. And he said, I had the feeling that this animal had drawn me to it, was allowing me to take pictures as long as it wanted. And when it was done, it left. Did you have that feeling that she was just letting you do that?
Somewhat. My experience was a little different, but it was similar in that I felt like there was some fatedness to it. And that, I mean, I love his story. And I think the book is full of those stories. And when you put yourself in that extreme an environment and in a quiet environment where you have a lot of introspection time and your mind quiets down and you become more alert and intuitive. And I just feel like, all the noise is gone. There's no cell phone. There's no Facebook out there. It's just dead quiet for hours. And you sort of go on this psychological journey by, it's inevitable. What was most touching to me, and some of this is in the book, was seeing the cat with the injury. Her left eye was heavily damaged, and part of what launched me on my own path of photography and the other artistic things that I've done is when I was in high school, I was hit in the eye playing sports, and I nearly lost this eye. I mean, I had a patch on it for months, and I had 3 surgeries, and part of my eye is made out of plastic at this point. And I basically, and there are years of photographs of me kind of like this, like my eyes barely open, and eventually, it mostly recovered, and I have to wear a contact in that eye, but it's a very bad functioning eye, and I almost lost it. And so when I finally saw this cat and it was looking at me with an injured eye, and I'm looking at it with, squinting through the viewfinder with my one good eye looking at it, and we're staring at each other for all these hours in the blind, I was hypnotized. I mean, it just felt, it felt like a spiritual experience, to be honest. And that there was some mirroring happening. That may sound far-fetched, but might have been thin air. But that's how I experienced it. And then to see her get better, was great. And I have that photo hanging on my wall behind me, and yeah, I'll always carry that one with me.
Wow, I can't.
And it worked out
But
in such a beautiful way because I got to experience the truly wild habitat that they usually inhabit, like in Hemis National Park. But the reality from a conservation level is that, a lot of the risk for them is where that habitat meets humanity. And so to see her on the edge of the village and to see how wildlife preys on livestock and the impact on that family, and to meet the farmer and then to go see what a proper livestock enclosure looks like, the ones that the Snow Leopard Conservancy helps build, so that the animals are not just wandering free at night. They're in a safe corral. And literally to meet somebody who was benefiting from the livestock insurance program, it just sort of reaffirmed everything that I knew about conservation. And when I look at how conservation works here and the places that I've seen it here, meaning California and other places around the world, like the conservation principles are the same. I mean, livestock enclosures is a thing in Sonoma County where I live. We have mountain lions. They kill people's goats and sheep and things like that. And, some people are like, I want to shoot that mountain lion. And other people are like, no, you need to build a fence or a barn or some kind of, we built a Puma proof pen at Sonoma County Wildlife Rescue to demonstrate to people how that works. And it doesn't have to be expensive. You just need cyclone fencing that's well troughed and, built, and you can just put your animals in at night, and then you don't have a problem with mountain lions. And, there's lights that deter predators, and just all these decisions we make about our pets, domestic animals, and how they roam into wildlife territory. Those things are universal. So I think supporting them, whether, it's supporting a program that's in your neighborhood or supporting like the Snow Leopard Conservancy and their efforts to do it, is great. I'm kind of fortunate I got to see it firsthand.
So often I think today we feel like we live like we're cut off from wildlife, but it's all around us.
Mm-hmm.
We just have to look, and there's not a lot of difference. We have coyotes where I live, and I have horses, and I have to be aware of, the fencing, and we have fox, and we have all kinds of little critters, and I have to make sure that my animals are protected and not assume that I have precedence over the landscape. Those animals live there too. So I need to protect my horses from them and them from my horses. So it's, and that it isn't isolated just to Asia or Africa. It's here in the United States too. Like you said, you build a predator proof, facility there, and it's enclosure there. Well, it's been wonderful to talk to you today, Jack. I'm sure everyone's enjoyed it. The only other question that we had in the chat is, have you ever seen any of the bears species that live in, she mentioned spectacled bears in Peru. Did you ever see, I'm sure you probably saw some primates.
It's
Seen
also
some
bears
primates
in Ladakh, brown bears.
Go ahead.
There's bears also
There are
in
brown bears
Ladakh.
in Ladakh, but I think you only see them in the summer.
I'm sure you
Incredibly.
saw some wolves, didn't you, when you were in different locations?
I did not see a wolf, but someone in our, one of the gentlemen from Europe, I think, saw a wolf. Well, so when I was away from them, we saw them at the beginning of the trip, and I saw them at the end of the trip, and in between they had seen a wolf. Yeah. I've seen pandas in China. They're pretty enchanting, but that's a lot different than a spectacled bear.
Oh, yeah. Well, Jack,
Yeah.
thank you so much for joining us today. Ashleigh, I think she just unmuted herself. I think she'd like to talk.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jack, for making this trek and for sharing your experience and being such a wonderful advocate for snow leopards and the Conservancy and all the wildlife that you've photographed. And your stories brought back a lot of fond memories from my travels as well. And ecotourism will come back. It's taken a hard hit right now because of COVID globally, but it is still one of the very best ways that we could support communities and really build that really rebuild that intrinsic value for the species. And so it's going to take a little while to come back, but I'm optimistic that we will. And as long as we can do it in a sustainable way where waste is managed appropriately and permits are given so that the parks aren't overrun, and we do it in a way that we move forward more sustainably. And I think this big pause in tourism has allowed us the opportunity to rethink how we do it.
That's
And
true.
moving forward, we'll be doing it in a way that's very thoughtful. And my experience in the parks in India, I remember feeling very conflicted because there were some people that I remember, seeing that you have these 4-hour blocks that you get to go out from sunrise till about 11 in the morning. And then you get to go, you have a break in between, and then you go out again in the late afternoon to sunset. And I remember as we were still going around, and I've never been so excited in my life, being in tiger habitat in India and seeing a couple of people that had already seen a tiger already exiting after only an hour in the park. And I felt just so conflicted. I didn't understand why they would be leaving when there was still so much left to see. And I was pretty upset about it. And it took me a couple of days to really think about it a little bit more and realize that without people that came for that reason, we wouldn't have these spaces. We wouldn't, if these people hadn't paid for these permits and paid to see these animals in this way, these parks might have been developed into something else. So, there is a role, for ecotourism at the highest level, but I love to see, more ecotourism that's involving citizen scientists and getting more people involved in the actual conservation work. And there's a really fantastic program that's very unique. It's called the Citizen Action for Tigers program in Malaysia. And it's with an organization called the Malaysian Conservation Alliance for Tigers. And basically anybody can go and help patrol in tiger habitat, one of the most beautiful parks in the world. It's one of the oldest in the world, called Taman Negara on peninsular Malaysia. And you can go and actually participate in the hikes and look out for snares and patrol, look for signs of wildlife, including tigers and sambar deer and sun bears, and change out camera traps. And you can actually participate in this program. And so you are not just participating in a safari, but also learning more about the ecology and the conservation. So I'd like to see more programs like that around the world where citizen scientists can get involved and really not only be there to photograph, but also participate in conservation. So I think there's a real opportunity for ecotourism to include more of that in the future. So I just want to thank everybody for joining today and this wonderful discussion on your experiences photographing wildlife around the world. Thank you.
Can I just butt in? Jack, would you go back to Ladakh? I know it's tough, but the outcomes are so magical. Would you go back if everything gets sorted out with this wretched COVID, blah, blah, blah?
I'll be back. I will be back. I don't know if I'll go to Ladakh or go somewhere else. I need to do a little more homework. The snow leopards are getting easier to see. I mean, I'm encouraged by that because for the ecotourism standpoint, I think there are more sightings now than ever. We're starting to establish that humans behave this way, snow leopards behave that way. Both sides understand that, and they can be in the same valley at the same time and not have an issue. And I feel like, so the sightings are going up, and that's kind of what I've seen happen, like in the Pantanal with jaguars. As it went on, I mean, I'm not saying that the Pantanal is well managed per se, but you had this increasing number of people able to see the animals. And so I feel like there's an opportunity there for that continued growth and more ecotourism. And, we'll see if it's Rumbach or some other valley or something like that. But yeah, I will definitely go back. And I think if you're at all adventurous, and I mean at all adventurous, and you love snow leopards, I would consider going. And I don't know, I don't know if it's appropriate, but reach out to the Snow Leopard Conservancy or do some homework on who is recommended as a guide that follows these sort of ethical parameters. Because I know there are places in the world where they're probably baiting snow leopards to, so people can see them. And that's just a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. We do have a few tour operators that we go through. So yes, please reach out if anyone has any questions about where you can see snow leopards. We are also working on launching a new ecotourism program in Annapurna in Nepal too. So the first group is supposed to go out later this year in November and as a trial, and then hopefully next year we'll continue to build upon that. So that'll be exciting.
And we've partnered with Karma Quest for several years, and I know in talking to them that they're just waiting for COVID to go away. They're very anxious to get back out in the field. And I know when we spoke with Vikram Singh, he too was just waiting to get back out in the field. He had left a corporate career to do this, and he said, I've only done it now 9 years. I'm not going to give it up. I'll just wait for COVID to go away. But I could never, the Oriel Alamani and his wife, Eulalia, they had gone to India, about 3 or 4 times before they actually did their photography to scout it out. And then they went back, I think 3 years in a row. And then COVID came along. But I think he decided to take a little break. But they were following the same family a couple of years in a row, a mother and her 2 cubs. And he said it was a very special experience to see them when they were real young and then go back the next year and see them almost grown with their mother. He said it was, you know, it was like developing a relationship with individual animals. But I've seen pictures of that same family from a lot of different photographers across social media. So there were a lot of people photographing her.
If I may too, I think if somebody's going to that part of the world, Ladakh is a remarkable cultural destination. I could spend 2 weeks there just photographing Leh and the monasteries and things around there. So I don't want to make it sound like you're going out into the middle of nowhere and might see something and might not. I think allow yourself some time in India to see what the culture's like in the Himalayas. It's beautiful.
And, as you know, Jack, Ladakh, if you've been to Nepal or Bhutan or other places, it's really like, to me, because I first went to the Himalayas in 1977, because I'm so old, it was like the old Himalayas. I really felt I was stepping back in time. It was so pristine on many levels. I think the worrying thing in Ladakh is the ever-increasing presence of the Indian Army and this skirmish thing with China. There's more and more troops going up there, and that's worrisome. But I know the park it's very protected. It's a big deal there for tourism and everything else. But I know Rodney was concerned about that. Let's just hope they all keep the lid on what's going on up there, because it would be, very negative for snow leopards if there are any more incidents, because they'll just keep having more fighter jets. When I was there was a lot of fighter jets and that going over, and that must really freak the snow leopards up. So yeah. I'm just praying that calms down, stays calm for the future.
Well, thank you everyone. Thank you, Ashleigh, and thank you, Margaret, and thank you so much, Jack. It's always wonderful to talk to you. Hopefully one day we'll all get to meet in person. That would be great.
Yeah, it'll happen.
COVID, go away. Don't come back. All right, everyone. Thank you. And we'll see you for our next cat chat in August with Ghulam Mohammed of the BWCDO. He's from Pakistan. Wonderful conservationist. So we'll see you then. And thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Yeah, you too. Lots of love. Bye.
Thank you. Thank
Bye.
you all.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
Bye.